So I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Let's, thanks, Josh. All right. So one of the things we've discovered is a good thing to do at the end of a session is some kind of a debriefing. Give you all a chance to say your impressions for how that session went. And so I'm going to ask you to respond to 3 different questions. What did you learn about problem solving? What did you learn about teaching problem solving? And what would you do differently? Okay, so I'll erase this and I'll record some of your answers in a second. Great.
There's always a way to break it down.
What did we learn about problem solving?
Sounds like to make it simpler. Yeah. I guess they're always. It's fair to say they're always. Yeah, you're always looking for a way to make it simpler. Yeah. So when you see something that's overwhelming, try to narrow it down to something that you can comprehend.
I like that one. I didn't think of probably half of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another good thing to say. Like, there's always more than one way to do that too.
Everybody brings something to the table. And I was just about to say, and that's important for the need of various levels. So when it comes back to
last one, I understand. What do you mean differently? Like in what context? You mean like teaching?
As a teacher, we can state all these different techniques, problem solving techniques, but when I think when I really take them in, when I really assimilate them really well, is when, you're deep in the heart of some type of problem and somebody goes, well, what if we only work with 5 digits or 3 digits? You really see the power of it. You're like, oh yeah, like I started out with
Have like a
yeah, and you were like 1 through 5, and I was like
with the other people that are here.
Right. Shall we take, let's get some responses. I think there's some really great conversation here. Let's get some, I want to record a couple things here. And, yes.
I have a comment on the second position there about
What did you learn about
what do you learn about teaching problem
Okay.
solving? As the administrator in the building who has to observe the teachers, I often see the teachers, especially when we come in, they don't allow the students to struggle. And we have to allow for that struggle time, because until you engage that frontal cortex of problem solving, the child is not going to own the learning.
Right.
And I think that's one of the biggest things, is you have to step back and allow the child to experience the failure in order to experience the success.
Right. So would you say build in time for struggle, or just allow time for
I
struggle?
would say a productive struggle. You don't want to let them struggle. Right.
Then they quit.
Frustration.
Or
it's sitting in
the student takes the next.
okay, how about that? Yes.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And in my experience, some of the curriculum materials, actually a lot of the curriculum materials that I'm familiar with, make that mistake. I mean, basically what I see, even things that are supposedly reform or whatever, a lot of times I look at it and it's like it doesn't allow the kids to think about the problem. It's like a set of instructions. Do this, make a table, do this, do this, do this, do this. So yeah, we really need to give kids and teachers.
It's the hardest thing to do to
to,
sort of.
let's just
give
think
up that
about
time.
it. Let's just think about it.
Got something over here?
I was going to say I agree with both of them, but also the fact that I liked how we gave him time to struggle, but then he walked around and he saw some good responses, and they had us go and explain a little bit to give us like a little hint, because we were struggling, and I was like, oh, that makes more sense. And by the end, those little breaks in between every 5 minutes, how about try this if you're struggling, or have someone come up here in your classroom. That was very useful.
So what would you say, helpful hints or something? Or
I like what you use the time for struggle, but then, yeah, like checkpoints.
Check in.
Yeah, checkpoints.
How about that? Check in with check in at the right time. Check in at exactly the right time.
One of the things I like to see that comes out of teaching in this way is students come up with solutions that I never would have thought of. And so if you provide hints, and I think you did a really good job of making it sufficiently subtle that, you know, maybe nobody thought that they were hints, but you know, they're not led, and they're still utilizing their own creativity to come up with solutions that other people might not have thought of, and you know, they become a wizard. You know.
The possession of the knowledge, if you discover it yourself, right? Okay. Yes.
I was just going to add to what you just said. I think the key to that tension, though, is that when he would come to our groups, he wasn't listening for something. He was really listening to what we were saying and being truly engaged in our group for the time that we had him. And I think that that's a struggle a lot of times, at least for me in my classroom, is you kind of have this idea in your head of how it's supposed to go. And so you're going around and you're listening to and making sure that everybody's on the right track as opposed to just being a part of that group.
Okay, that's great. How about, what about this first one? Yes.
What I noticed was, I mean, even when we were introducing ourselves, there's people from a lot of different backgrounds, but he was able to pick a problem that was truly a problem for everybody. And then as he walked around, keeping the pulse on the groups, he was able to allow each group to work wherever they were, because I could tell over here that you guys were ahead of where we were, doing things differently, but he didn't make us go in that route. He just kept us in the problem that we were engaged in.
Now, is that, would you say that's in this one, or?
Well, to me, it goes back to what is problem solving. So when he defined problem solving, he said it had to be something that, you know, wasn't just an exercise for you. So I think that it goes in the first column.
Okay, so what should I write here? So I heard a bunch of different things. Have a good problem.
Yeah.
Having a good. That's a good one. Having a good problem. Okay. Yes.
I think what I think it's really important, this observation about showing or solving a problem in more than one way. I remember as a child, this was, we solved the problem one way in the student circles. And it wasn't over. We were told, okay, scrap that. You have to do it, now solve it in a different way. Think about it differently. So this was really encouraged. And I notice in our freshman classes, when we go and teach, I see students are afraid of this. They don't want to see two different solutions.
Yeah.
And I think this should be encouraged
So I'll just
earlier.
amplify this. There are lots of ways to get there, and it's useful
To actually encourage.
to try to think of multiple ways. Yes.
This was more of a reminder than what I'd learned, but at least half of the things I did were unproductive. They weren't helpful. So, you know, it's just good to remember that in order to problem solve, you have to go in wrong directions.
Okay, so expect lots of false starts.
If you're not making mistakes, you're not.
So I'm going to try to hear from people that haven't spoken yet. Go ahead. Yes.
I'm used to leading problems, being up here.
Yeah.
And being down here and working on the problem. What surprised me was how hard it was to go from I'm working on this and I'm getting some ideas and then I want to share it with them. And then come back. And usually by the time I'm explaining something to them, I've got another idea and I want to go working on that, so leave me alone. It's really hard to go back and forth from not thinking about the mathematics to communicating with them.
Yeah.
Okay, how about, do we have anything for what would you do differently if you were doing this? Now, if you were teaching it in your class, or if you were leading it as a facilitator, or if you were just, you know, at lunch with a friend and told them the problem and they were scribbling it out.
We were talking about how we really liked how the problems came from us. Like the situation was presented to us, but then we came up with the problem. So maybe keeping an option available. So maybe there's two different routes that you could explore. And then people can go with the one they're more comfortable with. So keeping a question that's more complex, and then maybe one that doesn't require as much background knowledge.
I was going to say before, but since I'd spoken already, I couldn't. is that I thought this problem is great because it has multiple entry points. So you can understand this if you can do multiplication and addition. You can appreciate it if you have some knowledge of factorials. You can understand it as a problem in polynomials. It's a it's a problem. I was asking Tina, because she's a combinatorialist, if this has something to do with generating functions. I have some vague recollection. Okay, so and I was like, so there's you can appreciate this problem whether you're a third grader or whether you have a PhD in mathematics.
Okay, anybody else?
I have a question based on what you just said, because you've done this with students before, right? Do you find that, because you let us create our own questions, do you find that the questions that students create are only questions that they feel like they have entry into solving?
No.
So they'll create
Not
even
necessarily.
questions.
Yeah, I think they create pretty hard questions, even ones that I don't necessarily know the answers to sometimes on these things. Yeah, I get plenty of questions that I don't know how to solve when I open it up like that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's thank Josh again.